So a while back, I decided to, obviously as part of the conference, Rob and I were going to put together presentations, and I was trying to think of a good title for it, and the title obviously right here is not going to match what I'll be talking about. We'll get to the title later. I will reveal it for you. There's my Twitter hashtag, blog, company, etc. Thanks to Jason for allowing me to put in this slide. Couldn't have done it without you. Second thing I wanted to point out is completely unrelated to my topic. I wanted to point out a couple of tools that I use for some of the businesses that I run, and two of them actually happen to be sponsors. So one of them is Verelo, and these very nice graphs come from Verelo. It basically does website monitoring and lets you know how fast things are. So I've decided to put together a new website, as maybe 6 weeks ago, something like that, and so I immediately threw Verelo on it and started hosting it, and you can see the first day what those ping stats were and what the page load times were. Can anyone guess when I switched over to WP Engine? It was right around April Fool's Day when I did the DNS change, but it took a couple of days for it to go through. But I do encourage everybody to go through the sponsors. They do have a lot of good things to offer. On the USB drive, there is free services there. I have mentioned that before. So I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story first, and then we'll get into the rest of the presentation. And I want to take you back to Wednesday evening on March 23rd, or 21st, sorry. And I'm sitting there working. It was probably around 10 o'clock at night, and it was, coincidentally enough, on MicroConf stuff. And I sat there, and I was like, okay, it's 10 o'clock. It's getting kind of late. I haven't really been sleeping a lot lately, so I'm going to get ready to go to bed. So over the next 10 or 15 minutes or so, I decide that I get up and go upstairs, brush my teeth, do all that other stuff. And I started having these pains, like right here in my chest. I'm like, this is bizarre, it's odd. And I didn't think anything of it. And then things started to get worse. And it was probably about over the next 15 or 20 minutes or so that I decided that this actually might be a little serious. So about 2 days before, I probably wouldn't have thought anything of it at the time, but 2 days before, I'd had probably a similar episode where for about an hour, I had these chest pains. Things kind of worked themselves out. So I talked to my wife about it, and I'm like, yeah, this is getting worse. This isn't good. So I decided that, I should probably do something about it, or go to the hospital or something along those lines, because I didn't want to be like my Aunt Eleanor. So my Aunt Eleanor lived to be like 96 years old, and I have no idea how she made it this long, because she would go through periods of time where she'd have various health issues, and she would kind of ignore them, or she'd wait, she wouldn't really pay attention to them. And I distinctly remember the one time where she said, oh, well, yeah, I had a heart attack. I'm like, excuse me, what? And it turns out that she had a heart attack and decided to go to bed afterwards. So there's a streak of stupidity that runs in my family, which I am unfortunately afflicted with. This is not necessarily my real aunt, I haven't noticed. So I decided, I got to be smart about this. 10:30 at night, I'm not going to go to bed with my chest feeling like this. So, of course, I'm smart about it. I drive myself to the ER, which in retrospect was probably not a good idea. And I'm driving along, and of course that occurs to me after I'm about 2 or 3 miles down the road. And I get to the ER, and I find out that, anyone here, who here has been to the ER before? Yeah, how long does it take to get into the ER? Forever. You could go in there with like your knee behind your ear, and they will still make you wait 2 or 3 hours. But if you tell them you have chest pains, you're in like 3 seconds. So, of course, that whole thing happens. They bring me in, and I go through. They're asking me all these different questions. About your. It wasn't really about my health insurance, but like more or less how long it had been going on, what I do. I really felt like a lot of the questions were to kind of keep my mind off things, trying to keep me calm. So, basically, I'm sitting there at the ER, and the nurse comes over and she says, okay, I got to give you an IV. I'm like, all right. I'm like, well, I don't deal good with needles. I don't. I mean, kill a heroin addict. If I wanted to be a heroin addict, it would just kill it. There's no way. So she's like, don't worry, I'm really good with needles. I'm like, okay. She lied. Turns out it's not an IV, it was a catheter, and it's like a lot bigger. Worst pain that I'd had, and not down there, in the arm. So she gives me that, and of course, my body reacts the way that it does whenever somebody jabs me with a needle. My blood pressure spikes, and I have passed out from it before, which blows. But so I'm sitting there thinking to myself, and of course, my chest is killing me the entire time, and it is still getting worse. And I'm thinking to myself, is this it? Am I even going to make it to tomorrow? So I'm thinking about my wife, my kids, with those nice, funny T-shirts and stuff like that. Whether Rob's going to be pissed that I can't make it to MicroConf, because that's what I was working on. So as you can see from this photo was taken the next morning. It was around 10:30 in the morning. They have you go through a stress test if you ever have chest problems. And that's where they put you on a treadmill and make you run until you possibly pass out. And it got me to thinking. It made me realize a lot of things about what's important and what's not. And I did a lot of soul searching after this. I'm sure everyone remembers, last year, Steve Jobs died. And Stevie J Says, I'll let you guys read it because I don't want to read it for you. But basically, I thought about it, and I said, am I happy with my accomplishments? And have I done the things that I want to do? Am I going to get to the places, assuming I make it through the night, am I going to get to the places that I want to want to get to? So I started thinking about, a lot of other things, and just doing various research on what would, kind of ultimately end up being some of the other things that I would put in place for myself and what the future might hold for myself. And just to be clear, I'm not dying. Apparently it's, I don't know, my doctor seems to think that the weight loss plan that he put me on is probably pulling my chest out of whack, and that's what was causing the pain. Thanks. But one of the things that I came across was this quote, and it was winners versus losers. And it says, my philosophy is that losers have goals and winners have systems. Does anyone know who said that? Our favorite comic strip artist. And what he was talking about was he put together this process where he would go to the gym, and he would go there at a very specific time every day. He would go these days a week, and his intention was to go there, work out for X number of minutes, and then he would go home. And he went to the gym one day, and he decided, I'm here, I've already gotten here. Most people kind of get over that hurdle, and they say, well, yeah, I've already done all this work. I may as well just work out. And he's like, nope, I'm not going to do it. And he has a blog post about it where he basically talks and says that some people would look at it and say, well, you failed. You failed to meet your goal. You're a loser. You didn't succeed. And he's like, I don't look at it that way. Basically, it wasn't me that failed. I was trying to work on this system. The process worked. The process got me there. And I just didn't work out that day. It's not that I'm a failure. It's not that I'm a loser. It's that I just didn't do those things for that day. And that process was in place. So the topic, the actual title is Losers Have Goals and Winners Have Systems. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the systems and processes that I've kind of put in place that have kind of helped me through. And if you're not technical, try not to hate me for this. So this is a CPU pipeline which outlines the basics of how processor executes instructions from code or whatever. So you'll see that there's waiting instructions, then based on the clock cycle, things get moved through, and there's like a fetching state where the instructions are fetched from disk, and then they're decoded, executed, written back. And the problem comes up is when you're trying to execute things from code, whether it's assembly or what have you, you'll run into these conditional statements. So any if statement on the planet is going to cause what's called a conditional branch. And that conditional branch means that you get to that first stage, and let's say that it really is only 4 clock cycles to get through. Most modern processors take anywhere from 20 to, I don't know, I think it's like 80 or 100 at this point. And what they'll do is you basically have to wait until you have gotten through that entire pipeline to figure out whether or not the next statement that is right behind that if statement that you're executing is actually going to execute and is going to be useful. And the problem with that is that you don't necessarily know the answer to the work that you want to do until 60, 80 clock cycles later. So what the chip makers have done is they've said, well, let's do this speculative branch prediction, which basically says we're going to execute that, and we're going to try and predict which if statements are going to be executed and go this direction versus the ones that go that direction. And I'm going to kind of gloss over and ignore the things where they're doing things in parallel and going down both branches because it's probably not interesting. But the idea is that, is it possible to take something like this and use it in your business? Can you get more done by pipelining the things that you do instead of waiting for that stuff to kind of work its way through the system and then measure the results and then implement them? So it seems like a reasonable question is like, how does this apply to my business? And it doesn't. There's two fundamental flaws with trying to implement this. So the first one is that predicting the future is a lot harder in real life than it is with a processor, because a processor typically has a lot of other data points to go off of, and you're able to, it's basically able to make that predictive analysis and say, well, you've gone in this direction 300 times, I assume you're probably going to go there again, because you're most likely in a loop. The second one is that when in real life, the work that you're throwing away has quantifiable costs. With a processor, you're losing a few clock cycles, which at 3 gigahertz, you've got millions and millions of them all in a second. So it's not that big a deal to throw away 300 or 500 or even a few thousand of them, because it's not a big deal, because the people sitting there are sitting there clicking on the buttons and stuff, and it's all this other multi-threaded stuff that's going on. But the problem is in real life, you can't do that. It just doesn't work. However, you can still use this concept. The reason that CPU branch prediction works is because it's reasonably certain that that work is going to be used. So how do we guarantee that this work is going to be used, or at least increase the likelihood that you're going to use the other work that you're going to be pipelining? And the answer is really to differentiate between the types of work that you're doing. So there's two different types. I have a very broad spectrum of different types of work, but I kind of narrowed it down to just two. You can build processes and implementation plans, and then there's the part where you're actually executing them. And you should be focusing on number one. Build those processes, build those systems that will actually do the work for you. You shouldn't be necessarily doing the work. You should be building the processes and systems around them. And it's not to say that doing that work, if it makes you happy, is inherently wrong. It just means that you probably provide a lot more value to your business by building the systems as opposed to actually implementing them. So where can we apply this? There's a lot of different places in your business. And throughout your business, you can pipeline the vast majority of the systems that you have, whether it's A/B testing or niche evaluation. I mean, there's a whole laundry list of these things that you can essentially pipeline. You can build systems around. You say, this is how I'm going to do this. This is how I'm going to analyze this. And then you can follow that process. Use your goals to measure how well that process does, not necessarily to, just to reach those goals. I mean, some people will say, yeah, my goal is to reach 200,000 in revenue by the end of, next year. But how are you going to do that? Is what you're doing repeatable? And this is really what that whole idea is about, is focusing on those things that you find that are going to be repeatable. So next I'm going to talk about some of the things that I've done and some very explicit things, very explicit examples. So how many people here listen to the Startups for the Rest of Us podcast? So a good number of you. How much time do you think that we actually spend on the podcast? An hour? What about the editing, the transcription, all that other stuff? That's exactly right. We don't do any of it. So we use a virtual assistant for that.
It's not even us talking on the podcast.
We script that out too. So basically what we do is the first 10 episodes or so, we did everything ourselves. We did all the editing. We do it in Audacity. We basically imported everything, figured out how everything was supposed to work, what we wanted to do with it, figured out who to use for the transcription services and everything else. And then we brought in a VA who basically does everything else for us. So our process for recording the podcast is either he'll put together the outline for the podcast, or I will, and then the other person will review it at some point before we record it. And then we record the episode, and then we dump it in Dropbox, and that's the last thing that we do in regards to touching that podcast before it goes live. That's it. There are times where we will have to also go in and make some of the show notes and stuff, but the extent of our involvement with that process is very minimal. And as you can see, roughly 180 hours of work saved over the course of the past, 2.5 years or so, something like that. It does cost money. I mean, we don't charge for the podcast, but it has cost us money to do that. But think about that in terms of valuating your time. Jason has a phenomenal blog post on valuing your time as a founder of a company at $1,000 an hour. And if we were to apply that to that, that's $180,000 that we theoretically saved by doing this at a cost of a mere $3,000, which is an insane way to look at those things. But it really does work. It allows you to focus on the things that really do matter, that fundamentally matter to your business. So the second one is a website that I set up it was probably 6 or 7 weeks ago, about the time of the chest pains, of course. And so what I did was I basically said, I'm going to hire a virtual assistant to edit these videos, created a bunch of videos. These videos are very, very short. They're probably 2 to 3 minutes in length each. And you can see from the time that it takes to edit that raw video, it takes anywhere from 10 to 15 times the length of the raw video in order to edit it. And that's to do a good job, to make sure that you have things zooming in, or you are highlighting different things, or moving the screen around, et cetera, getting rid of any weird things in the audio, because a lot of times when you're doing a recording for a screencast that you want to have professionally done or look professional, you'll do some things and then you say, shoot, I meant to say that a little different, or you stuttered or something along those lines, and you have to backtrack. So then you have to separate the audio and video lines, and it's a real pain in the neck. But once you've figured out that process, you can outsource that, you can send it off to somebody else. And these are my anticipated savings for the next 10 weeks or so. I know that it would take me at least 10 to 15 hours of work in order to actually do it myself on a weekly basis. I'm outsourcing it. It's going to cost me probably $1,800 to have that done. I already have customers lined up for this who are already willing to pay me. If I have it done in the next 4 weeks, I've got one willing to pay me $500. So another example is developer onboarding training. So I've started outsourcing some of the different things that, some of the underlying code for a couple of different projects I have. And there's a few different things that factor into that. So Camtasia Studio and Snagit, those things are really great tools. $329, you can get them. There's tons of alternatives out there as well. You get those things, you go to screencast.com. They've got a free subscription service, 2 gigs of space on their servers. You can do permissions-based, password-protected folders, and just basically hand off those videos to people, send them a link, send them the username and password for those folders. And if you ever need to change them, you can. It's not a big deal. So I documented this process for setting up my development environment, and it took me about 2 hours or so to do. And the frustration that will save me for never having to do that again is just absolutely priceless, because that's a complicated process. It's a lot of complicated things, like, oh, you have to have things in this folder versus that folder, make sure that this is uppercase, and et cetera. You can have that all documented. You document it once. You can talk through it in your screencasts, and it's very, very simple to do, very easy. So one of the questions you might have is, well, this is great. This is awesome for using VAs. It's a great way to leverage people who are not necessarily technical. But can you do it for other things? Can you do it for code? Can you do it for product development? And the answer is yes. So I have a product that I've been overhauling, and I did catch some flack from people on the podcast about spending some time on it. And these are the things that I looked at when I was justifying whether I was going to spend my time outsourcing that stuff or not. And I found a C# web forms developer on Odesk. Took me, let's see here, in 24 hours I had, I'd say 80 people apply to the job. I actually had to shut it down after that because there were just so many people applying for that. And I was only offering, I think the range was $9 to $18 an hour. And I found one, $11. It's $11.11 to be specific. He spent 275 hours. I've spent about 20. And the project is done at this point. So that's $275,000 of savings. And it cost me $3,000. Another thing that I've looked at is last year there was this, I forget exactly where it was, there was a discussion topic that a couple of people had, and it was the idea of this Marketing Monday. And Marketing Monday is all about doing all of your marketing stuff on Mondays. And basically if you're doing traffic analysis and you need to do these things on an ongoing basis, basically set aside, and it doesn't necessarily need to be Monday, it could be any day of the week, but set aside a full day to dedicate to those types of things. And by doing that, and you make it repetitive, that's probably not something that you can necessarily outsource, but it is a system and a process that you can put in place that will help you kind of focus on the things that are important. The next thing that I did, I know you guys were not going to be able to see this, and I didn't have a slide for it. But basically, I put together these little, they look like business cards. I'll hand it, I've got like 400 of them. If anybody wants some, just come see me later. But basically it says, it's got a little line for your name, for your email address, and it's got a little checkbox that says, yes, I would pay X dollars a month for that. And if you're doing business analysis, you're trying to figure out, is there a market for my product? Does this idea have legs? Is anyone going to pay for it? Which is a very important part of it that nobody asks, or most people don't ask. They build the product first. And then they try and figure out how they can find people to pay for it. Use these cards, ask people, and by putting it on paper, you're basically asking them to make an upfront commitment and say, yes, I will pay for that. And doing things like this are things that will fundamentally help you move forward. So in the interest of transparency, I've decided that I'm going to basically put out revenue numbers for the past 5 years or so, and I will walk through them for you because they are a little bit awkward to look at. And basically you'll see that these are our income numbers for the different businesses that I had. Back in 2005 is when I quit my job. And in 2006, that's basically when things started really taking off for me. It's also about the time that my wife was sitting there looking at things and say, well, we're going to have a baby soon. I'm not so sure. 2007 is when she quit her job. 2008, I had a bunch of employees. 2009, the entire economy tanked. I talked about it last year at this conference. But you can see over the last couple of years that despite some of those challenges, starting to put those processes and systems in place is starting to pay off. And I'd like to be able to show this slide in 5 years or 10 years and show that it's continuing to rise. But in the interest of fair disclosure, I'll say that this doesn't tell the true story either. So on this slide, what you're going to see is you're going to see two different lines. And that top one is the revenue line. The bottom one is actual income / profit. It's, if you take profit and drop out what my actual salary, what I pay myself is, then it'd be zero. But that top line is basically revenue. And it shows a completely different story than that last one. The last one showed that, oh, well, things looked pretty good. But the revenue number, if you see that revenue number, it's going up, and income is actually going down. And why is that? And it's because I didn't put processes in place. I hired employees. I didn't have a good system for bringing them on board or trying to help put them in a position to help bring more business bring more money into the business. But over the past couple of years, I've started putting those things in place. And I'm hoping that this trend continues. I also feel like, and I think that some of the other speakers will probably be able to talk a little bit more to this point and see if my hypothesis on this is correct. But if you look at a lot of the hockey stick curve growth curves for some of the larger startups that are doing quite well, my suspicion is that the reason that they start getting that hockey stick growth curve is because they're putting processes in place, and they're figuring things out, and they're using the goals that they've set to help measure those processes, make adjustments, and then iterate. So I guess to kind of close things up a little bit, you really have to do things that matter, and not just for your business, for yourself. there's a lot of things that I could say here, but I think that when you're looking at those things, each person has their own views on what's important to them and what's not. Executing these processes is not inherently wrong. If you enjoy doing them, by all means do them, but make sure that you understand that you're doing them because you enjoy them, not because it necessarily moves the business forward. Build the systems, analyze what's working, what's not, and then iterate from there. And the last part of advice, I guess I'd say, is building these processes is going to get you farther. And it will get you there faster. Thanks.
All right, we have time for 2 questions. Then we'll take a short break and see our last speaker. Any? All right.
Would you use that developer again that you found on Odesk?
Question was, would you use that developer again that you found on Odesk? And will you use that developer again?
I put him on a different project, yes. Yep.
All right.
Hi there. With the business card thing, the name, the email, and yes, I would pay X dollars for that. What did you do with the card? Did you give it to someone? Did they?
I had them made 3 days ago, so
All right. Okay.
it's a rather new process that I'm working on.
But what's the plan? You put them? Do people give them back to you, or I didn't know?
My plan is to find, like, if I'm analyzing a business idea, basically, and somebody says, yeah, that sounds like a great idea, basically ask them for a commitment and hand it to them. And if they're not willing to say, yeah, here's my name and email address, and this is how much that I pay, then chances are it's more of a loose commitment. It's more of your mother telling you that, that looks great, honey. It's not necessarily a firm commitment that they are willing to pull out their wallet and actually pay for it.
Are you expecting them to give you money there and then?
No. I would pay for that if you had it built, for example.
And then you get the card back.
Yes.
Okay.